Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Year 4 Maths for this morning. We're going to start off this morning exactly the same way we did yesterday. There'll be 4 questions. 2 of them will be mental oral questions, and 2 of them will be questions that you might want to write the answers down. When the questions come up on the screen, I would suggest you press pause on the video, and then when you're finished, press play, and I'll go through the answers with you. So here we go with the questions for today. And I would remember, triangles are your mental oral questions. Squares are the questions that you might want to write down. They're in a funny order today. I don't know why that is, but just be careful when you're doing that. Okay, press pause now. Okay, for our answers then. First question, 467 plus 4. Again, similar to yesterday, this is about knowing your number bonds to 10. First, you would need to add 3 to make the number the nearest or next 10, which is 470, and then you would add the remaining 1. So 467 plus 3 will make 470, and then plus 1 would be 471. Second question this morning is fractions. Okay, so we're looking for a quarter of 12. Now you might remember back in the days when we were in the classroom together, one of the last things we did before Oakhampton we were looking at fractions of numbers. So to find a fraction of a number, remember you took the number and divided it by the denominator. So in this case, 12 is the number that we have, and we're going to divide it by the denominator, which is 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3. So 1/4 of 12 would be 3. Next question is, well, we're into the written questions now. 642 plus 339. Methods for using, again, most efficient method, a bit like yesterday, would be the abstract method of column addition. And the example of that is here. Again, a bit similar to yesterday, you could partition the numbers if you wanted to and add up the hundreds, the tens, and the ones, as you can see here. And then you would recombine those numbers. So you would have 600 plus 300 would be 900. 40 plus 30 would be 70. 9 plus 2 would be 11. And then finally, 900 plus 70 plus 11 would leave you with an answer of 981. The next question, what method did you use for 363 plus 475? Again, this is similar to the other question. What we've looked at in this question, though, is that, is there a better way of ordering the numbers? And generally, we would always start with the largest number, the most significant number. So here, what I've done is I've reversed the order of the question. Doesn't make any difference to the answer, but just makes your life a little bit easier. So I've started with 475 and I've added 363 to it. Again, here you can see I've used abstract method of column, and over here we've partitioned the numbers and added them together. So our answer then is 838. So on to the main part of today's lesson. And today we're going to be following on from yesterday. Yesterday we were rounding decimals to whole numbers. Today we're going to be writing fractions as decimal numbers and looking at the link between them. Our star words today are decimal, tenth, hundredth, and equivalent. Okay, all of the other 3 we've been using in the last sort of 3 or 4 lessons, but the word equivalent now comes into play. And you might remember the word equivalent from our maths lessons earlier on in the year. The word means the same as, something that is the same as. Okay. So our in focus question today will be to look at the fractions that you have on the screen there. We have 1/2, we have 1/4, and we have 3/4. And the in focus question is saying, how do we write these fractions as decimals or as decimal numbers? We'll come back to that. We'll look at it all the way through the lesson, but we'll come back to that question again at the end. first thing we're going to look at today is what's the, how do we look at a decimal number or a decimal equivalent to 1/2? You can see that here I've got a number square, 100 square. There are 100 squares within this larger square, and you can see that what we've done is divided them up into strips of 10 or tenths. Okay, so there would be 10 of these strips of tenths in the whole number, and we know that anyway because 10 lots of 10 would normally equal 100, so there's a big link there. Now in this case you can see shaded green here, you've got 5 of those tenths, 5 strips of 10 are shaded, and you can see by looking at the shape that that means that half of the shape has been shaded green. 5 tenths then is the same as 1/2. Okay, and we would know that as well, that if we write 5 tenths, okay, the top digit 5 is half of the denominator, the bottom digit. So 5 is half of 10. 5 tenths is the same as 1/2. We'd normally write that as 0.50. Okay, that would mean that 50 out of the 100, okay, is shaded 0.50. Or we could even write that as 0.5. We don't need to add the 0. So 1/10 would be 0.1 or 0.10, but 5 lots of them would be 0.5 or 0.50. This method is pictorial because we're seeing it as a picture. It is possible to show it as an abstract calculation as well. Now here you can see that we've got half over here, half. Now if I wanted to turn that into tenths, okay, you can see that I'm having to multiply the 2 by 5, and that will get me 10. Now you might remember in the maths lessons that we've had already this year, the fraction lessons, that whenever we're dealing with fractions, if we are finding equivalent fractions, whatever we do to the bottom or to the denominators, we must also do to the numerators. So here we're multiplying by 5, we must do the same to the top. So 1/2 or 1 times 5 will leave us with 5 on the top. So 1/2 is the same as 5 tenths, which also equals 0.5. This would be more of an abstract method. Moving on to a quarter, if we write, or if we're looking to be able to try and write 1/4 as a decimal number, and you think back to our learning intention, we are trying to write fractions as decimal numbers, we would need to change it into hundredths. Okay, on the number square, exactly the same square that we had before, where there are 100 squares, if we are to shade 1/4 of it, it would be 25 smaller squares. We know there's 25 because there are 5 multiplied by 5. 5 5s are 25. So 1/4 is the same as 25 hundredths, 25 out of 100. And as a decimal, this is a bit easier, we can actually just write that as 0.25. You can see the link there between 25 hundredths and 0.25. There's a definite link when you write those numbers. It is possible that we could write it as an abstract method using just the numbers again. So if I had 1/4 and I want to convert that into hundredths, then I would take the 4 and I would have to multiply that by 25. 4 lots of 25 or 25 lots of 4 will equal 100. Remember, whatever we do to the bottom, we must do to the top. So 1 times 25 will leave me with 25. So 1/4 then will equal 25 hundredths or 0.25. Now it is possible to use this method to find 3/4. Okay, the first thing we need to do is find 1/4, and then we will multiply that by 3 to find 3/4. So here, if we know that 1/4 equals 0.25, 3 of them then would be 0.75. It would be 3 lots of 25. And we know it's going to be 3 lots of 25 because here we have 1/4 and we want to times that by 3. So 1 times 3 will give us 3. But we need to do the same to this one here. We are multiplying it by 3. Now we come to independent learning. It is your turn now. Okay, we're going to look at pages 29 to 30 of the workbook today, and you're going to complete worksheet 15. What I would suggest you do is when you're completing the task, when you're doing the work, press pause and then play it when you're finished. Press pause now. Okay, so for an extension task today, using what we know and what we've learned this morning, could you write the following quantities as decimal numbers? What we're trying to do here is make this a real life link. So the first question here, I've got 1 3/4 kilometers, sorry. If I wanted to write that as a decimal number, what would it be? 6.5 kilograms. What would that be as a decimal number? And 4 1/4 litres. What would that be as a decimal number? Press pause now while you're working it out, and then we'll come back together and we'll quickly go through these answers. Okay, welcome back. The first question there, 1 3/4 kilograms. What we need to know, what we need to really focus on is this 3/4 part here. Okay, and we know through our learning this morning that 3/4 is the same as 0.75 or 0.75. So our first question here is going to be written as 1.75 kilometers. The second one here, again, we're looking at the fraction 1/2. What was that the same as? Well, when we think back to our learning earlier, half was the same as 0.5 or 0.50. So in this case then, it would be, the answer would be 6.5 kilograms, or if you've got 6.50 kilograms, that would be just as good. And then finally, we'd need to know what 1/4 was as a decimal number. And we know that 1/4 is 0.25 or 0.25. So the answer to this question would be 4.25 litres. So we've come to the end of the lesson. Let's try and draw things together. I'm going to give you the chance to have a little think in a minute about what we've taken from this lesson and what we've learnt from this lesson. What are the key facts that we've picked up? I want you to press pause now and discuss your learning with an adult or somebody else at home, or else you might want to just sit and think about it yourself. I don't mind. And then I want you to press play and we'll just quickly pick out what I think are the key points from this lesson. So, what have we learned from this lesson? Okay, the first thing I think we know now is that to change a fraction to a decimal, you must first either turn the fraction into tenths or hundredths. So we talked about 5/10 being the same as a half. Well, 5/10, as we saw on our little chart earlier on, was also the same as 50 hundredths. So you must change things either into tenths or hundredths. Key piece of learning for this session is whatever you do to the bottom, or whatever you do to the denominator, you must also do to the top, or the numerator. If you multiply by 2 on the bottom, you must multiply by 2 on the top. And finally, to find 3/4 of something, I would need to first find 1/4. And that applies to any fraction. If I was finding fifths of something, if I wanted to find 4/5, first of all, I need to find what 1/5 was. So to find, more than one of something, you must start at the beginning and find one, in this case 1/4. Very, very important. Okay, that brings us to the end of our maths session for this morning. Answers will be posted on the website tomorrow. I look forward to seeing you then. Please remember, stay safe and look forward to seeing you all soon.